What if everything we've been taught about history is missing crucial pieces deliberately erased from the record? Picture this: vast halls filled with scrolls and manuscripts, each one holding secrets that could rewrite our understanding of the ancient world. Then, in an instant, they're gone, reduced to ashes by flames that didn't just destroy books, but obliterated entire lineages of knowledge. The burning of ancient libraries wasn't just about loss, it was about control. Who decided what we were allowed to know, and what truths were deemed too dangerous to survive? From the legendary Library of Alexandria, a beacon of learning that held the sum of human thought, to the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, where scholars from across the globe gathered to translate and preserve ancient texts, these weren't just buildings. They were vaults of forbidden knowledge, storing ideas that challenged the powerful, questioned the divine, and even hinted at technologies far ahead of their time. But time and again, these sanctuaries of wisdom met the same fate: fire. Some say it was war, others call it fate. But what if these burns were anything but accidental? What if they were carefully orchestrated to shape the narrative of history itself? This is the story of the books that weren't meant to survive, the ideas that were too revolutionary, the discoveries too disruptive, the histories too inconvenient. Behind every flame that consumed these libraries, there's a hidden agenda, a deliberate silencing of voices that dared to think differently. So what were they trying to hide, and how different would our world be if those ancient scrolls had survived? Together, we're going to trace the smoke back to its source, uncovering the truths that were stolen from us, and piecing together the fragments of a past that was almost lost forever. The answers might just change everything you thought you knew. Ancient libraries weren't just buildings, they were living, breathing engines of progress, where the greatest minds of their time gathered to push the boundaries of human understanding. Think of the Library of Alexandria, a place so vast it was said to hold every book in the world. Within its walls, scholars pored over groundbreaking works by Archimedes, who calculated pi and designed machines that seemed to defy physics. Euclid's geometry laid the foundation for modern mathematics, while medical texts from across the ancient world documented treatments we're only now rediscovering. These weren't just books, they were blueprints for civilization itself. But the true magic of these libraries wasn't just in preserving knowledge, it was in sharing it. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad became a crossroads of cultures, where scholars translated Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, and Persian astronomy into Arabic, creating a shared language of innovation. Imagine a 9th century scholar in Baghdad reading the works of Aristotle, while another in Spain studied advanced algebra from Indian texts. This was a world where ideas flowed freely, where a discovery in one corner of the globe could spark a revolution thousands of miles away. So why were these libraries targeted? Because knowledge has always been power, and those who controlled it could shape the future. When the Library of Alexandria burned, we didn't just lose scrolls, we lost entire schools of thought, alternative histories, and scientific breakthroughs that might have changed the course of humanity. Some rulers saw these libraries as threats precisely because they fostered independent thinking, a population that questions, that innovates, that remembers its past that's harder to control. The fires that consumed these treasures weren't just accidents of war or acts of carelessness. They were deliberate erasures meant to silence voices that challenged the status quo. Today, we're left with fragments, hints of what once was. A medical procedure described in a surviving text might make us wonder what other cures were lost. A single surviving page of an ancient astronomer's work could suggest they knew more about the stars than we thought. Every time we uncover an old manuscript or decode a forgotten language, we're piecing together a puzzle that was meant to stay broken. The legacy of these libraries isn't just in what they held, but in what their destruction took from us, the questions we'll never be able to answer, the innovations that might have been. And that's the real tragedy, not just the loss of knowledge, but the loss of possibility. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a building, it was the beating heart of the ancient world's knowledge, a place where the brightest minds gathered to debate, discover, and dream. Within its walls lay scrolls from every corner of the known world, Babylonian star charts predicting celestial movements with eerie precision, medical texts detailing surgeries we wouldn't rediscover for centuries, and philosophical treatises that dared to question the very nature of reality. This was a treasure trove so vast that historians believe we've lost more than 90% of its contents, entire civilizations' worth of wisdom gone in flames. But here's the chilling part: no one can say for certain how it burned. Some blame Julius Caesar, who set fire to his own ships during a siege in 48 BCE, accidentally igniting the library's warehouses. Others point to Emperor Theodosius I, who ordered the destruction of pagan temples and their libraries in 391 CE. Then there's the Arab conquest in 642 CE, where legend claims Caliph Omar declared the library's contents either redundant to the Quran or heretical against it, ordering the scrolls used as fuel for bathhouses. 3 different eras, 3 different motives, yet one devastating outcome: the silencing of ideas that threatened those in power. What makes the loss even more haunting are the whispers of what might have been inside. Ancient historians speak of scrolls documenting lost technologies like Archimedes' steam-powered devices, or Heron of Alexandria's mechanical inventions that hinted at early automation. There were reportedly alternative histories of Egypt, written by priests who preserved knowledge predating the pharaohs themselves. And then there's the infamous Book of Thoth, a mythical text said to contain secrets of the gods, so dangerous that anyone who read it would be cursed. Whether these works were real or legend, their absence leaves us with an unsettling question: how much of human progress was delayed because these ideas were reduced to ashes? The tragedy of Alexandria isn't just about the fire, it's about the pattern. Every time a library burns, it's never just an accident. There's always a reason, whether it's a ruler consolidating power, a religion stamping out dissent, or an empire rewriting history. The books that vanished from Alexandria didn't just contain facts. They held perspectives, challenges to authority, and visions of the world that didn't align with the narratives of the powerful. And that's precisely why they couldn't be allowed to survive. When we look at the smoke rising from Alexandria's ruins, we're not just seeing the end of a library. We're witnessing the first draft of history being edited, with flames as the eraser. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad wasn't just another library. It was the crown jewel of the Islamic Golden Age, a place where the world's knowledge converged under one roof. Picture a 9th century metropolis buzzing with scholars from Persia, India, Greece, and beyond, all working side by side to translate, refine, and expand humanity's collective understanding. Here, the works of Aristotle and Euclid met breakthroughs in algebra by Al-Khwarizmi, whose very name gave us the word algorithm. Medical texts from the House of Wisdom laid the groundwork for modern surgery, while astronomers charted the stars with precision that wouldn't be matched for centuries. This was more than a library. It was a living, breathing think tank where the boundaries of science, philosophy, and art were pushed daily. Then came 1258, the year the Mongols rode into Baghdad. The siege was brutal, but the destruction of the House of Wisdom wasn't just collateral damage, it was deliberate. As the story goes, so many manuscripts were thrown into the Tigris River that its waters turned black with ink. The Mongols weren't just conquering a city, they were dismantling an intellectual empire. Why? Because knowledge is resilience. A culture that preserves its learning can rebuild, can resist, can remember. By burning the House of Wisdom, the Mongols weren't just erasing books, they were severing a lifeline to centuries of innovation. The message was clear: compliance wasn't enough. Submission required forgetting. Yet whispers of what was lost still haunt us. Among the destroyed texts were treatises on optics that might have revolutionized lenses centuries earlier, maps of the world more accurate than any in medieval Europe, and medical encyclopedias detailing treatments we're only now rediscovering. Some say there were even blueprints for early mechanical devices, proto-robots described in intricate detail. A handful of texts survived, smuggled out by scholars who risked everything. These scattered fragments hint at the staggering breadth of what once filled those halls. But the real tragedy isn't just the loss of individual works, it's the disruption of an entire intellectual tradition. When the House of Wisdom fell, the Islamic Golden Age began to wane, and with it, 1,000 possible futures flickered out. The burning of Baghdad's library echoes a pattern we've seen before and since. Knowledge is power, and power fears what it can't control. The Mongols understood that to truly conquer a people, you must first conquer their memory. What makes the House of Wisdom's fate so chilling isn't just the scale of the loss, it's the precision of the strike. This wasn't a random act of war, it was a calculated blow to the very idea of progress, and that raises a question that lingers today. How many leaps forward have we missed because the libraries that held them were reduced to ashes? When a library burns, it's never just about the flames, it's about who gets to write history. Take the case of the pagan libraries in the late Roman Empire. As Christianity rose to power, many early church leaders saw the ancient Greek and Roman texts not just as relics of a fading world, but as direct threats to their authority. Works on philosophy, science, and mythology that had been studied for centuries were suddenly labeled dangerous heresy hiding in plain sight. In 391 CE, Emperor Theodosius issued decrees ordering the destruction of pagan temples and their libraries. The message was clear: only one version of truth would be permitted. But this wasn't just about religion, it was about power. Imagine a world where multiple belief systems coexisted, where alternative ideas about medicine, astronomy, or even governance circulated freely. That kind of intellectual diversity was a problem for rulers who needed unquestioned obedience. By burning certain texts, they weren't just erasing words, they were simplifying reality itself, narrowing the scope of what people could even imagine as possible. The irony: many of the very scholars who condemned these pagan works were secretly preserving them, realizing too late that knowledge, once lost, is nearly impossible to recover. On the other side of the world, Islamic conquerors took a different approach, at least at first. When Muslim armies swept through the Middle East and North Africa, they didn't burn libraries indiscriminately. Instead, they preserved Greek and Roman texts, translating them into Arabic and building upon their ideas. But even here, there were limits. Works that directly contradicted Islamic teachings, like certain philosophical tracts or unapproved histories, often disappeared. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad might have been a beacon of learning, but its shelves weren't entirely free of censorship. Knowledge was valued, but only up to a point. Political rulers played the same game. When the Chinese Qin dynasty unified the country in the 3rd century BCE, Emperor Qin Shi Huang ordered the infamous burning of books and burying of scholars. Legalist texts were kept, Confucian works were destroyed. Why? Because Confucianism emphasized moral checks on power, a dangerous idea for an emperor who saw himself as absolute. Centuries later, Spanish conquistadors in the Americas would do the same, burning Mayan codices to sever indigenous people from their own history. The pattern never changes. Knowledge is power, and uncontrolled knowledge is rebellion waiting to happen. So what were they so afraid of? The answer lies in the margins of the few surviving texts. Scraps of alternative histories, suppressed scientific theories, philosophies that challenged divine right. These weren't just ideas. They were keys to different ways of organizing society, of understanding the universe, of questioning authority. Every time a library burned, it wasn't just books turning to ash. It was a future that would never be. Among the countless scrolls consumed by flames, some losses cut deeper than others, works so revolutionary that their absence still distorts our understanding of history. Take Aristotle's lost dialogues, rumored to challenge his own published philosophies with radical ideas about democracy and the soul. Or Hypatia's mathematical manuscripts, said to contain equations that predicted planetary motion centuries before Copernicus. Even the Babylonians left behind fragments of star catalogues so precise they could predict eclipses down to the hour, yet most of their astronomical records vanished when the Library of Nineveh fell. These weren't just books, they were intellectual time capsules holding ideas that might have reshaped entire civilizations if they'd survived. What made these texts so threatening? Consider the case of the Sibylline books, Rome's most sacred prophecies. When the original volumes burned in 83 BCE, scholars scrambled to reconstruct them from fragments, but historians suspect the recovered versions were heavily edited to align with imperial agendas. The originals reportedly contained warnings about the fall of kings and the rise of republics, ideas that didn't sit well with Rome's ruling class. Similarly, when Christian monks copied ancient Greek texts in the Middle Ages, they often omitted passages about heliocentrism or atomic theory, dismissing them as pagan errors. The pattern is undeniable. Knowledge that empowered the people rarely survived unscathed. The greatest tragedy lies in the gaps we don't even know to mourn. The Library of Carthage supposedly held Phoenician sailing manuals detailing trade routes to the Americas, accounts that could rewrite the history of exploration. The Maya left behind just 4 surviving codices, yet Spanish priests wrote of burning hundreds that contained dangerous astronomical knowledge. Even China's imperial libraries selectively preserved Confucian texts while purging records of earlier egalitarian philosophies. Every vanished work represents a fork in the road not taken, a silenced voice that might have guided humanity down a different path. Perhaps the most haunting question isn't just what was lost, but why we'll never fully grasp the scale of it. When fire consumes a library, it doesn't just destroy known works, it erases the very memory of what once existed. We're left piecing together clues from passing references in surviving texts, like detectives reconstructing a crime scene from scattered fingerprints. The Babylonian astronomer whose name appears only as a footnote in a later Greek text, the Egyptian medical scroll mentioned in a letter but never found, these ghosts of lost knowledge remind us that history isn't just written by the victors. It's also shaped by the flames they chose to light. The story of lost knowledge takes an even stranger turn when we consider the shadowy role of secret societies, groups that didn't just burn books but hid them. While conquerors and religious authorities erased texts openly, organizations like the Hermeticists, Gnostics, and later the Knights Templar operated in whispers, preserving knowledge they deemed too potent for the masses. Ancient alchemical manuscripts speak of the philosopher's stone, not just as a tool to turn lead into gold, but as a metaphor for transformative truths, ideas so revolutionary that their keepers believed the world wasn't ready for them. Consider the legendary Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, a cryptic text said to contain the secrets of the universe. While fragments survived, many believed the full version was deliberately concealed by initiates who feared its misuse. Similarly, Gnostic Gospels discovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945 revealed alternate Christian teachings about divine knowledge accessible to all texts the early church branded as heresy and tried to destroy. But here's the twist: evidence suggests some of these lost works weren't destroyed at all. They were hidden in plain sight, encoded in cathedral architecture, or tucked into the private libraries of Renaissance elites. The deeper you dig, the more patterns emerge. Medieval alchemists wrote in riddles not just to protect their secrets from rivals, but to avoid persecution. Leonardo da Vinci's mirrored handwriting may have been more than eccentricity. It could have been a precaution against prying eyes. Even Isaac Newton, often remembered as the father of modern science, spent years obsessively studying alchemical texts, convinced they held truths mainstream academia refused to acknowledge. The line between protecting knowledge and hoarding, it blurs when you realize how many breakthroughs from chemistry to astronomy were first explored in these underground circles centuries before being accepted. What's most fascinating isn't just what these groups hid, but why. Some genuinely believed releasing certain knowledge too soon could destabilize society. Imagine handing nuclear physics to 14th century warlords. Others may have sought personal power, monopolizing insights that could challenge religious or political authority. And then there are the conspiracy theories, whispers of societies preserving maps to Atlantis, blueprints for ancient energy devices, or even contact with non-human intelligences. Whether any of that is true misses the point. The real power of these stories lies in what they reveal about humanity's fraught relationship with knowledge itself, the tension between sharing wisdom and fearing its consequences. Today, we see echoes of this in modern academia, corporate patents, and government secrecy. The players have changed, but the game remains the same. Control the narrative, and you control the future. When a 13th century monk scribbled in the margin of a forbidden text, "Beware the unworthy eyes," was he protecting truth or gatekeeping it? The answer may lie not in what we've found, but in what's still missing. Every time a coded manuscript resists deciphering or a vaulted archive stays locked, we're left to wonder, are some truths meant to stay hidden, or have we just not fought hard enough to reclaim them? Buried beneath layers of ash and time lie whispers of technologies so advanced, they seem to defy the timeline of human progress. The Antikythera mechanism, salvaged from a 2,000-year-old shipwreck, still stumps historians with its intricate bronze gears, a device capable of predicting planetary movements with precision that shouldn't have existed until the Renaissance. But what if this wasn't an outlier? What if it was just one surviving fragment of a much larger technological landscape, most of which was deliberately erased? Consider the accounts that didn't make it into mainstream history. Ancient Indian texts like the Vaimanika Shastra describe flying machines called vimanas, powered by mysterious energy sources referred to as mercury vortex engines. While dismissed as myth by modern scholars, the specificity of these descriptions down to cockpit instrumentation and flight maneuvers raises unsettling questions. Similarly, the Great Pyramid's design suggests an understanding of mathematics and astronomy that rivaled Newton's, yet no surviving Egyptian texts explain how such precision was achieved. Could these gaps in the record be more than coincidence? Then there are the darker possibilities. Roman historians like Pliny the Elder wrote of burning mirrors used by Archimedes to set enemy ships ablaze during the siege of Syracuse. a weapon harnessing sunlight as a directed energy beam. Greek fire, the Byzantine Empire's infamous naval weapon, burned even on water, its formula so closely guarded that it vanished forever when Constantinople fell. These weren't just tools, they were game changers, technologies that could tilt the balance of power in an instant. It's no wonder rulers might have seen their blueprints as threats too dangerous to preserve. The real mystery isn't just what was lost, but why these technologies never resurfaced. Take the case of Hero of Alexandria, whose 1st century CE manuscripts detailed steam-powered engines and automatic temple doors, inventions that could have sparked an industrial revolution a millennium early. Yet his work was treated as mere amusement, shelved until the Renaissance when it was rediscovered as if new. Was this neglect or something more deliberate? When libraries burned, they didn't just take books, they severed the thread of cumulative knowledge, forcing each generation to reinvent the wheel while the true potential of antiquity's genius turned to dust. Today, we're left with eerie echoes. The Baghdad Battery, a 2,000-year-old clay jar containing an iron rod and copper cylinder, bears an uncanny resemblance to a primitive galvanic cell. Medieval stained glass windows in European cathedrals contain nanoscale gold particles that manipulate light, a technique we've only recently replicated with modern lasers. These anomalies hint at a shadow history of innovation, one where the brightest sparks were systematically extinguished. The question lingers, if even a fraction of these technologies had survived intact, how different would our world look, and who stood to lose the most if they had? Amid the ashes of burned libraries, flickers of ancient wisdom stubbornly persisted, carried forward by unlikely heroes working in the shadows. In damp Irish monasteries, monks hunched over candlelit manuscripts, painstakingly copying Greek philosophy onto vellum scraps between psalms. Across the Mediterranean, Arab scholars preserved Aristotle's works by translating them into Arabic, then back into Latin centuries later when Europe was ready to reclaim them. Even as flames consumed the great libraries, these quiet guardians of knowledge ensured that fragments survived, but their selectivity tells its own story. Take the case of Plato's dialogues, which survived nearly intact while his pupil Aristotle's most controversial works vanished. Why? Because Plato's vision of philosopher kings aligned neatly with medieval notions of divine order, while Aristotle's empirical methods threatened the church's authority. Medical texts by Galen endured because they could be stripped of their pagan context, repackaged as Christian wisdom. Ptolemy's star charts were preserved not for their revolutionary astronomy, but because they reinforced the geocentric universe that powerful institutions endorsed. This wasn't preservation, it was curation by fire, a slow filtering of ideas through the sieve of orthodoxy, yet some truth slipped through the cracks. The Archimedes palimpsest, a prayer book overwriting a 10th century copy of the mathematician's lost works, was nearly erased forever until modern imaging technology revealed the original ink beneath. In a Spanish monastery, a lone copy of Lucretius on the nature of things survived centuries of suppression, its atomic theory and multiverse speculations waiting until the Renaissance to shake the foundations of science. These weren't accidents of survival. They were acts of quiet rebellion by scribes who recognized value in forbidden knowledge, hiding heresy between the lines of approved texts. The real intrigue lies in the patterns of what made the cut. Mathematics and medicine often fared better than philosophy or history. Useful tools were less threatening than paradigm-shifting ideas. A Persian scholar might save a Greek geometry text while burning its accompanying treatise on democracy. Byzantine monks preserved Homer's epics but let manuals on early chemistry turn to dust. Every surviving work carries the fingerprints of the gatekeepers who deemed it harmless or useful enough to risk preserving. What does this selective survival mean for us today? Our understanding of antiquity is like a puzzle with most pieces missing, where the remaining fragments were handpicked by those with agendas. When we read Plato's Republic, we're not just absorbing ancient wisdom, we're seeing the version of history that medieval copyists and Islamic translators decided we should see. The voices that survived did so because they didn't challenge the powerful too directly. The real question isn't just what we lost, it's how differently we'd understand human thought if the censors hadn't been so thorough. The flames that consumed ancient libraries may have died out centuries ago, but the instinct to control knowledge never disappeared. It just evolved. Today, the click of a button can erase information as thoroughly as any bonfire. Governments quietly remove inconvenient historical records from digital archives. School boards debate which books belong on shelves, often under the guise of protecting children. Even tech giants wield unprecedented power, deciding which voices get amplified and which vanish into algorithmic obscurity. The tools have changed, but the stakes remain shockingly familiar. Whoever controls the past controls the future. Consider how easily digital knowledge can disappear. In 2017, the Trump administration deleted climate change data from government websites. China's Great Firewall blocks access to foreign news outlets and historical events like Tiananmen Square. Wikipedia edits wars rage as factions rewrite entries to fit their narratives. Unlike ancient scrolls, digital information leaves no ashes, just silence where facts once lived. The irony is painful. In an age where we could preserve every book ever written on servers the size of a shoebox, we've created systems where censorship is easier than ever. Yet there's a crucial difference between ancient and modern knowledge control. When Alexandria burned, its losses were absolute. Today's erased information often persists in fragments archived by activists, mirrored on shadow libraries, or whispered across encrypted channels. The internet remembers even when it pretends to forget. But this resilience comes with new vulnerabilities. Companies like Google and Facebook act as gatekeepers, their algorithms quietly shaping what billions of people see as truth. A single policy change can make entire fields of study harder to access, just as surely as a Mongol horseman tossing manuscripts into the Tigris. The most insidious modern parallel isn't in blatant censorship, it's in the slow, selective erosion of inconvenient truths. School curriculums that gloss over colonialism, search engines that prioritize popular content over factual accuracy, even the way social media feeds flattened complex histories into shareable memes. These aren't book burnings, they're reality edits subtle enough that most people never notice what's missing. Ancient rulers burned libraries to assert dominance. Today's power brokers achieve similar results by flooding the zone with misinformation, drowning truth in noise until no one knows what to believe. Perhaps the greatest lesson from history's burned libraries is this: knowledge doesn't just vanish in moments of destruction, it slips away through countless small decisions about what's worth preserving. Every time we choose convenience over depth, compliance over curiosity, we're complicit in the same patterns that turned Alexandria's halls to smoke. The digital age handed humanity an unprecedented gift: the ability to safeguard our collective memory forever. Whether we'll use that power or repeat the mistakes etched in ancient ashes remains an open question. Buried beneath volcanic ash for nearly 2,000 years, the Villa of the Papyri in Herculaneum holds one of history's most tantalizing near misses. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE, its pyroclastic surge didn't just destroy this lavish Roman estate, it carbonized an entire library, preserving scrolls in a state so fragile that touching them would reduce them to dust. For centuries, these texts remained unreadable, their secrets locked behind blackened, brittle layers. But now, advanced imaging techniques like X-ray phase contrast tomography are slowly peeling back the layers, letter by letter. Early readings reveal not just poetry and philosophy, but fragments of scientific treatises that challenge our assumptions about ancient understanding of physics, medicine, and even the cosmos. Then there's the enigma of the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in 1947 by a Bedouin shepherd tossing rocks into a cave. These 2,000-year-old manuscripts contain biblical texts older than any previously known, but also something far more provocative: alternate versions of familiar stories, apocryphal writings excluded from later canon, and community rules for a Jewish sect that saw itself at odds with mainstream religious authority. Among the most startling finds was the War Scroll, detailing an apocalyptic battle between the Sons of Light and Sons of Darkness, a narrative that never made it into standard scripture. These weren't just lost texts, they were evidence of entire theological currents that vanished from history when orthodoxy consolidated its power. But perhaps the most electrifying discoveries are the ones we can't yet fully grasp. In Turkey, the underground city of Derinkuyu stretches 18 stories deep, its purpose still debated. Was it merely a refuge, or did it house something more, perhaps a repository for knowledge deemed too dangerous for the surface world? Similarly, the recent decoding of the Indus Valley script's numerical system hints at a sophisticated understanding of mathematics that predates Babylon by centuries. Yet without surviving texts, we're left guessing at the full scope of their knowledge. Every unearthed fragment tells the same unsettling story. Our historical record isn't just incomplete, it's been selectively pruned. When archaeologists pulled the Antikythera mechanism from a shipwreck, they assumed it was medieval until dating placed it in the 1st century BCE. Its intricate gears, capable of predicting eclipses and Olympic cycles, suggest a lineage of mechanical engineering that simply doesn't appear in surviving texts. The same pattern emerges with the Baghdad battery's possible electrochemical function, or Chinese seismoscopes that detected earthquakes from miles away. These weren't one-off curiosities. They were likely part of broader traditions of innovation that didn't survive their era's intellectual purges. What makes these discoveries so compelling isn't just what they reveal, but what they imply. For every villa of the papyri we unearth, how many more lie undiscovered or were destroyed beyond recovery? The carbonized scrolls from Herculaneum show singed edges where additional shelves once stood, their contents lost forever. The Dead Sea Scrolls represent a fraction of what may have been hidden across Judea's caves. Each excavation feels like finding a single page from a burned encyclopedia, hinting at volumes we'll never read. And that's the heart of the mystery. We're not just piecing together what was lost, we're measuring the shadow it left behind. Power rarely surrenders its grip willingly, and throughout history, certain ideas posed such a radical threat to the established order that they had to be erased. Imagine a world where every village could harness energy from the air, where medical knowledge rendered plagues obsolete, or where political philosophies proved kings were unnecessary. These weren't just abstract concepts, they were existential threats to those who relied on scarcity, mystery, and hierarchy to maintain control. The burning of libraries wasn't random vandalism, it was surgical. Take the case of ancient energy technologies. Greek legends spoke of the Archimedes ray, a device that could focus sunlight to incinerate enemy ships. Byzantine texts referenced liquid fire that burned on water, likely an early form of napalm. But what if these were fragments of a broader tradition? Scrolls from Alexandria reportedly describe devices that could draw power from the ether, while Hindu epics detailed Vimanas powered by mercury vortex engines. Whether these accounts were literal or metaphorical, they hinted at possibilities that would have upended the energy monopolies of their time. If fire could be weaponized or energy harnessed from the environment, what need would there be for kings who controlled oil reserves or priests who interpreted divine will? Then there's the even more explosive possibility, evidence of advanced prehistoric civilizations. The ancient Egyptian priest Manetho wrote of scrolls documenting a time before the pharaohs, when gods walked among humans, texts that mysteriously vanished from later dynastic records. Plato's account of Atlantis wasn't unique. Flood myths from Mesopotamia to the Andes describe cultures with technology and wisdom lost to catastrophe. What if these weren't myths at all, but distorted memories of real societies, for rulers who claimed divine mandate, acknowledging that earlier civilizations had achieved greatness without gods or kings would have been disastrous? Burn those records and history begins with you, but perhaps the most targeted knowledge of all was the kind that empowered ordinary people. Democratic philosophies from Athens, egalitarian teachings from Gnostic Christians, even early communist ideals in China's well-field system. These ideas didn't just challenge authority, they rendered it obsolete. When the Qin dynasty burned Confucian texts, it wasn't because they were false. It was because they taught that rulers must earn their mandate through virtue, not bloodline. The same pattern repeats wherever dissent emerges. The Cathars of medieval Europe, the Taborites of Bohemia, the Maya astronomers, all saw their libraries torched not for being wrong, but for being too right. The tragedy isn't just that these ideas were lost, but that their suppression distorted humanity's trajectory. Imagine if Hero of Alexandria's steam engine had sparked an industrial revolution in the 1st century. Picture a world where the medical knowledge of the House of Wisdom had spread unchecked, saving millions from the Black Death. Consider how differently politics might have evolved if Aristotle's lost dialogues on democracy had survived intact. Every burned library didn't just erase the past, it stole possible futures. And that raises an unsettling question. What revolutionary ideas are we dismissing today that future generations will mourn as lost? The disappearance of ancient knowledge didn't just leave shelves empty, it rewired how humanity thinks. Picture a world where Hippocrates' lost medical volumes had survived, where Archimedes' complete theories on mechanics weren't reduced to footnotes. The absence of these works isn't neutral, it lingers like a phantom limb, an intuition that crucial pieces of our intellectual heritage were ripped away. This isn't just about missing data, it's about fractured identity. When you don't know what you've lost, the hunger for it becomes a quiet, relentless hum beneath civilization's surface. Consider how differently science might have evolved if the library of Alexandria's treatises on optics or germ theory had reached medieval Europe. Would the Dark Ages have been so dark? The void left by these gaps didn't just slow progress, it distorted it. For centuries, scholars worked with half the puzzle, unaware that foundational texts existed elsewhere or had been deliberately destroyed. This collective amnesia bred something insidious, a distrust of official narratives. If entire schools of thought could vanish overnight, what else might authorities be hiding? The rise of conspiracy theories, from Atlantis lore to suppressed technologies, isn't just fantasy. It's the mind's desperate attempt to fill the blanks where knowledge should be. The psychological toll echoes in academia's unspoken anxiety. Historians whisper about the Alexandria effect, the nagging sense that every breakthrough is actually a rediscovery. When Einstein formulated relativity, he had no idea that Islamic scholars like Alhazen had pondered light's behavior centuries earlier. How many geniuses wasted lifetimes solving problems whose answers turned to ash? This isn't hypothetical. The Antikythera mechanism proves ancient Greece grasped celestial mechanics we'd attribute to Renaissance Europe. The Baghdad battery suggests electrochemistry might have been within reach 2 millennia before Volta. Each revelation forces us to confront an unsettling truth. Human progress didn't march forward in a straight line. It stumbled blindly through the smoke of its own burned libraries. Yet the most profound impact isn't on science, it's on culture. Myths thrive in emptiness. The fewer primary sources survive, the more room there is for manipulation. Take the burning of Maya codices by Spanish missionaries. By destroying all but 4 books, they didn't just erase history. They handed future generations a blank slate to project their own narratives onto. Today's debates over alternative histories aren't random. They're symptoms of a civilization trying to reconstruct its memory from fragments, mistaking shadows for substance. The hunger for lost wisdom manifests everywhere, from Dan Brown novels to ancient astronaut theories, not because people are gullible, but because the historical record feels intentionally fractured. What makes this loss uniquely painful is its invisibility. We mourn the Library of Alexandria because we know its name, but what about the countless regional archives and private collections that vanished without fanfare? The Sumerian city of Eridu reportedly held clay tablets documenting flood myths older than Genesis, yet its library dissolved into mud. The Nalanda University in India, torched by invaders in the 12th century, supposedly contained Buddhist texts that could rewrite our understanding of early psychology. These silent gaps in the record aren't passive, they actively shape how we perceive reality. When you grow up in a world where history starts with the winners, you internalize that power dictates truth. Perhaps the greatest tragedy isn't the knowledge we lost, but the collective mindset it forged, one that expects censorship, suspects authority, and romanticizes the idea of hidden truths. Every time a scholar hesitates to pursue a radical theory for fear of ridicule, or a researcher stumbles upon an anomaly they can't explain, the ghost of those burned libraries whispers, "Someone didn't want you to know this." Whether that voice is paranoia or intuition depends on how much of the past you trust survived the flames. Efforts to reconstruct lost knowledge feel like assembling a cosmic jigsaw puzzle where most pieces are missing, but the ones we have revealed breathtaking glimpses of what once was. Take the Archimedes palimpsest, a prayer book from the 13th century that was painstakingly scraped clean to reuse the parchment. Beneath the hymns, scholars discovered something extraordinary: erased copies of Archimedes' works, including The Method, a treatise revealing how he used infinitesimals to calculate areas and volumes, a concept that wouldn't be formally developed until calculus emerged 2,000 years later. Using multispectral imaging and artificial intelligence, researchers have slowly teased the original ink from beneath the medieval script, pixel by pixel. It's as if we're eavesdropping on a conversation between 2 eras, separated by time but connected by the stubborn persistence of ideas too powerful to fully erase. This isn't just about recovering words, it's about decoding intent. When scholars reconstruct texts like the lost dialogues of Aristotle or Sappho's poetry from charred Egyptian papyri, they're not just filling gaps in literature. They're uncovering the intellectual battles of antiquity. For example, cross-referencing quotes from early Christian writers who disparaged heretical Gnostic gospels allows us to reconstruct parts of those banned texts from the very insults aimed at them. It's a paradox. The attempts to silence these works often preserved fragments of their content in the critiques of their opponents. Like detectives piecing together a crime scene from witness statements, historians stitch together alternate versions of history from the scattered mentions in surviving books, letters, and even marginal scribbles. Technology is revolutionizing this recovery process. Machine learning algorithms now analyze writing styles to predict missing sections of damaged manuscripts, much like autocomplete suggests words in a text message. In 2022, researchers used AI to reconstruct passages from the Herculaneum scrolls carbonized by Vesuvius eruption by detecting microscopic variations in the papyrus fibers where ink once clung. Elsewhere, spectral imaging has revealed ghost libraries in medieval manuscripts where monks scrubbed away pagan texts but left chemical traces of the original ink. These tools don't just restore words, they expose the fingerprints of censorship itself, showing us exactly which ideas were deemed too dangerous to survive. Yet for all our advances, some losses are permanent. We'll never know how much of Democritus' atomic theory vanished when his 200 treatises were burned, leaving only second-hand summaries by critics. The complete works of Hypatia, the mathematician and philosopher lynched by a Christian mob, survive only in fleeting references. Even when we recover physical texts, context evaporates the marginal notes, the classroom debates, the oral traditions that gave these ideas life. What remains are echoes, like hearing one side of a phone conversation and trying to guess the other. The most poignant reconstructions aren't just technical triumphs, they're acts of defiance. Every time a scholar deciphers a palimpsest or an AI resurrects a charred line of poetry, we're rejecting the verdict of those ancient flames. These projects prove that knowledge, once unleashed into the world, refuses to die quietly. It lingers in footnotes, hides between layers of parchment, and waits centuries for the right technology to give it voice again. The irony is delicious. The very tools of our digital age are allowing us to outwit the censors of the past, turning their attempts to erase history into a challenge we're finally equipped to solve. What emerges from these fragments is more than information. It's a map of intellectual roads not taken. The Archimedes palimpsest shows us a version of mathematics that might have accelerated scientific progress by millennia. Recovered passages from the Dead Sea Scrolls reveal theological diversity that could have reshaped religious history. With each reconstruction, we're not just learning about the past, we're glimpsing parallel futures that were stolen from us. And that raises a haunting question. How many other palimpsests lie undiscovered in monastery libraries or buried in desert caves, still holding their secrets tight? The search continues, not just for answers, but for the questions we don't yet know to ask. Imagine stumbling upon a perfectly preserved manuscript from the Library of Alexandria, one that contained instructions for recreating an ancient plague or a psychological technique to manipulate masses. The thrill of discovery would quickly give way to a chilling dilemma. Just because we can share this knowledge, does that mean we should? This isn't hypothetical. In 1945, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, scholars debated for years whether to publish passages describing apocalyptic weapons or rituals that could be dangerously misinterpreted. The same ethical tension pulses through every rediscovery of forbidden knowledge. Where do we draw the line between preservation and responsibility? History offers sobering lessons about the double-edged nature of revelation. The Chinese alchemists who accidentally invented gunpowder while seeking immortality never imagined its transformative and destructive potential. Ancient Sanskrit texts describe samhara karma, precise rituals said to invoke catastrophic weather. If real, their misuse could weaponize nature itself. Even seemingly benign discoveries can spiral. The rediscovery of Greek fire recipes in Byzantine archives led to medieval arms races. Knowledge, once unleashed, doesn't discriminate between healers and tyrants. This raises an uncomfortable parallel with the very figures who burned libraries. Were they villains, or were they, in some cases, acting as reluctant gatekeepers? The modern world faces this tension daily. When virologists reconstructed the Spanish flu virus in 2005 to study its lethality, critics warned they'd created a blueprint for bioterrorism. AI researchers now grapple with whether to publish algorithms that could generate disinformation at scale. These dilemmas mirror the choices of ancient librarians who might have destroyed texts not out of fear but foresight. The Gnostic Gospels, suppressed for teaching that divinity resided within all people, could have undermined feudal hierarchies but also sparked chaotic spiritual revolutions. Is ignorance ever the safer path? Yet withholding knowledge carries its own perils. The Catholic Church's suppression of heliocentric astronomy delayed scientific progress for centuries. Many believe the Library of Alexandria's lost medical texts could have saved millions from the Black Death. Secrecy breeds power imbalances. When only elites access certain truths, they weaponize ignorance. The Rosetta Stone, once a tool for priestly control, became a key to democratizing history when shared. Perhaps the real ethical test isn't the content of forbidden knowledge, but our capacity to handle it wisely. This leaves us with a paradox. The same societies that burned libraries also preserved fragments in coded forms, alchemists writing in riddles, monks hiding heresy in plain sight. They understood that knowledge can't be unlearned, only delayed. Today, as we digitize crumbling manuscripts and decode palimpsests, we inherit their dilemma. Some truths might need gradual revelation, like controlled burns in a forest releasing wisdom in doses humanity can absorb without catastrophe. The smoke from Alexandria's ashes still swirls around us, whispering a question. Is it safer to light the torch or the candle? The answer, perhaps, lies not in the flames, but in the hands that hold them. History isn't just written by the victors, it's filtered through the books they chose to spare. Take Carthage, the North African empire Rome so thoroughly erased that its own name for itself, Cart Hadasht, survives only in fragments. When Roman legions sacked the city in 146 BCE, they didn't just burn buildings, they incinerated centuries of records, treaties, and literature, leaving us with a history of Carthage told almost entirely by its enemies. The few surviving accounts paint Carthaginians as child-sacrificing monsters, but what if their own writings had survived? Would we instead remember a maritime superpower whose navigators may have circumnavigated Africa 2,000 years before Vasco da Gama? Without their voices, we're left with caricatures where complex civilizations should be. This pattern repeats like a broken record across the ancient world. The Maya left behind thousands of bark paper codices filled with astronomical calculations and historical records until Spanish missionaries burned all but 4, dismissing them as devil's work. What got lost in those flames? Not just dates and names, but entire worldviews. The surviving Dresden Codex contains precise Venusian calendars proving the Maya tracked planetary movements with staggering accuracy, but the missing books might have explained why. Were they predicting celestial omens, aligning rituals with cosmic cycles? We'll never know, because Bishop Diego de Landa's bonfire reduced a civilization's intellectual legacy to ashes and guesswork. Even when texts survive, their context often vanishes. Homer's Iliad endured because it glorified Greek heroes, but the Trojan version of events, assuming they wrote one, disappeared when their libraries fell. The few surviving Egyptian medical papyri detail surgeries and contraceptives, but the philosophical frameworks guiding these practices are gone, leaving modern scholars to puzzle over whether a treatment was meant to balance humors, please a god, or both. It's like finding a cookbook with ingredient lists but no instructions. We see the pieces but miss the logic connecting them. The most insidious effect of these gaps isn't just missing facts, it's the illusion of completeness they create. For centuries, historians assumed the ancient Greeks invented democracy from whole cloth, until cuneiform tablets revealed Mesopotamian city-states experimenting with citizen assemblies a millennium earlier. How many other Greek innovations were actually adaptations of lost ideas? The irony is brutal. Civilizations we credit as originators may have been standing on the shoulders of giants whose works we'll never read. Perhaps the greatest casualty of these erased archives is empathy. When only one side's records survive, their enemies become one-dimensional villains instead of complex societies with their own triumphs and tragedies. The Carthaginians weren't just Rome's foes. They were mothers, poets, and engineers who built harbors so advanced their design wasn't matched until the 19th century. The Maya weren't just bloodthirsty pagans. They were mathematicians who conceived of zero independently of India. Every burned library didn't just take knowledge, it stole nuance, leaving us with a history that's less a tapestry and more a patchwork of holes held together by threads. Nowhere is this distortion more dangerous than in how we view cultural declines. Rome didn't so much fall as transform. Yet the narrative of barbarian chaos persists because the Ostrogoths and Vandals didn't leave libraries explaining their perspectives. What if their invasions were less about mindless destruction and more about rejecting Roman corruption? We'll never hear their side, so we default to the story told by the literate elites who survived, the same elites who'd naturally cast themselves as civilized victims rather than oppressive landlords. This isn't just ancient history. Modern conflicts still play out over competing narratives, where controlling archives means controlling memory. The difference is, today we're aware of the fragility of knowledge. When ISIS bulldozed Nineveh's libraries in 2014, the world watched in real time as millennia of Assyrian history turned to dust. But here's the twist. Archaeologists had already digitized many of those texts. For the first time, we're fighting back against historical erasure, not with fireproof vaults, but with bytes that can be copied infinitely, scattered across servers where no single flame can reach them all. The lesson of Alexandria isn't just about loss, it's about the resilience of ideas when we refuse to let them be monopolized. Long before ink touched parchment, knowledge lived in the human voice, passed carefully from teacher to student in sacred groves, around desert campfires, and within the hidden chambers of mystery schools. While flames could reduce libraries to ash, oral traditions flowed like underground rivers, preserving ideas too dangerous to carve into stone. The Druids of ancient Europe famously refused to write down their teachings, believing that true wisdom required years of disciplined memorization, a safeguard against both outsiders and the corruption of meaning that comes when words are separated from their living interpreters. In India, Vedic hymns survived for over 3,000 years through precise phonetic repetition, with families dedicating generations to maintaining each syllable's exact pronunciation. These weren't just stories, they were time capsules of cosmology, medicine, and ethics, encoded in rhythm and rhyme to outlast empires. The resilience of oral wisdom reveals a paradox. What seems fragile words whispered in the dark often endured when written records fell to invaders or zealots. Indigenous cultures from the Maori to the Cherokee preserved star maps and migration histories through chants, with landmarks and celestial events serving as mnemonic triggers. The griots of West Africa could recite genealogies spanning centuries, embedding historical truths within epic narratives that doubled as moral instruction. Even Pythagoras, the Greek mathematician, allegedly learned his most profound concepts not from scrolls but from Egyptian and Babylonian oral initiates, who guarded secrets of geometry and harmonics through recited formulas. These traditions understood something modern archives often forget. Knowledge isn't just information, it's a relationship between the speaker, the listener, and the context that binds them. Yet oral history comes with its own shadows. Without written anchors, details shift with each retelling like stones smoothed by a river. The Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece promised initiates transcendent wisdom, but because divulging their rites carried a death penalty, we're left with only third-hand accounts. Fragments suggesting revelations about the afterlife or psychedelic sacraments, but no way to verify them. Similarly, Celtic bardic schools supposedly taught memory techniques so powerful they could preserve thousands of verses flawlessly, yet their methods died with the last practitioners. The very secrecy that protected these traditions also made them vulnerable to extinction when lineages were broken by war or persecution. What makes these oral fragments so tantalizing is how they occasionally align with lost written records. Amazonian shamans describe medicinal plants unknown to science until their uses were rediscovered in burned Spanish missionary logs. The Popol Vuh, a Maya creation epic preserved orally after the book burnings, later matched glyphs deciphered at archaeological sites. Even Herodotus, the Greek historian, relied on Egyptian priests' oral accounts to fill gaps in his chronicles, stories modern archaeology has since corroborated. These echoes suggest that oral and written histories aren't rivals but complementary strands of a single, fractured tapestry. The most profound lesson from these living libraries isn't about the past, it's about the future. Today, linguists race to document dying languages before their last speakers pass, knowing that with each extinction, an entire way of seeing the world vanishes. The Cherokee concept of two-eyed seeing, balancing empirical observation with spiritual insight, or Aboriginal songlines that encode navigation through melody, challenge the dominance of Western scientific frameworks. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of Alexandria's burning wasn't just the loss of scrolls, but the silencing of dialogues we'll never hear, debates between written scholars and oral keepers about the nature of reality itself. In the interplay between the spoken and the written, between the archived and the remembered, lies a truth neither can fully capture alone, a reminder that wisdom, in the end, belongs not to parchment or voice, but to the curiosity that keeps seeking it. What if the greatest libraries of antiquity weren't just repositories for their own time, but time capsules deliberately packed for futures they would never see? Hidden within the scrolls of Alexandria or the clay tablets of Nineveh might have been messages meant for civilizations yet unborn, wisdom sealed away like letters addressed to strangers centuries later. The ancient world was obsessed with the idea of legacy. Egyptian pharaohs built pyramids to endure eternity. Babylonian astronomers charted star cycles spanning millennia. So why wouldn't their librarians have similar foresight, carefully selecting texts not just for contemporary scholars, but for generations they believed would need their knowledge most? Consider the strange case of the Antikythera mechanism. Discovered in a shipwreck off Greece, this 2,000-year-old device, with its precise bronze gears tracking planetary movements, was so advanced that historians initially assumed it was medieval. Its existence suggests a tradition of mechanical engineering far beyond what surviving texts describe. Was it meant to be found? The ship carrying it was en route to Rome, packed with luxury goods, yet this intricate computer seems out of place among statues and jewelry. Some theorists propose it was being transported not as treasure, but as a teaching tool, a masterwork intended to inspire future tinkerers. If so, its loss at sea delayed that inspiration by 1,500 years. Even more intriguing are the whispers of time-release knowledge embedded in ancient collections. The Library of Alexandria reportedly housed scrolls written in code, their true meanings accessible only to initiates who understood their keys. The Hermetic texts, esoteric works attributed to the mythical sage Hermes Trismegistus, claim to contain secrets that would, bloom like flowers when the world was ready. Similar ideas appear in Hindu prophecies about forbidden sciences that would re-emerge in humanity's darkest hour. Were these metaphors or actual instructions left by librarians who knew their works might outlive the civilizations that created them? The tragedy is that we'll never know how much of this forward-thinking curation was lost. When Baghdad's House of Wisdom fell, flames consumed not just Arab scholarship, but Persian, Indian, and Greek texts translated for future study. Those translations were themselves acts of preservation, bridging languages and eras. The librarians didn't just archive knowledge, they built bridges across time, hoping someone on the other side would cross. Today, when we decipher a palimpsest or reconstruct a charred manuscript, we're not just recovering the past. We're finally receiving letters mailed millennia ago, stamped with a silent plea. When you read this, be wiser than we were. Perhaps that's the true purpose these libraries served, not as static museums of thought, but as lighthouses flashing signals into the fog of history. Their keepers understood that knowledge isn't owned by any single era. It's a baton passed blindly between generations, sometimes dropped, sometimes hidden, but always waiting to be picked up again. The real mystery isn't just what they knew, but how much they guessed we'd need to know. Fire has always been more than a tool of destruction. It's a symbol seared into humanity's collective memory, carrying layers of meaning that transcend mere violence. When ancient conquerors set libraries ablaze, they weren't just erasing words, they were performing a kind of alchemy, turning knowledge into smoke and ash in a ritual as old as civilization itself. In nearly every culture, fire represents purification, a force that strips away the corrupt to reveal the essential. The Persians revered it as a divine mediator between earth and heaven. The Romans used sacred flames to consecrate new beginnings. So when flames consumed the library of Alexandria or the House of Wisdom, was it mere vandalism or something closer to a sacrament, a calculated act of ideological cleansing? The parallels are unsettling. Just as alchemists used fire to transmute base metals into gold, rulers and zealots wielded flames to transform dangerous ideas into harmless dust. Consider the Roman Empire's suppression of the Sibylline books, where oracles deemed politically inconvenient were ritually burned in the Forum, or the Spanish Inquisition's auto da fe ceremonies, where heretical texts were publicly torched alongside their owners, the fires serving as both punishment and propaganda. These weren't impulsive acts of rage. They were theatrical displays designed to show crowds the literal and figurative cost of unapproved knowledge. The message was clear. Fire didn't just destroy, it purified the world of wrongthink. Yet there's a darker, more primal layer to this symbolism. Fire doesn't just erase, it terrifies. The crackle of burning parchment, the way smoke darkens the sky, these are visceral, unforgettable warnings. When the Mongols threw the House of Wisdom's manuscripts into the Tigris, they didn't just want to destroy books, they wanted to break a culture's spirit. The ink-blackened waters became a metaphor for intellectual drowning, a spectacle meant to paralyze survivors with fear. Similarly, when Nazi bonfires consumed degenerate literature in the 1930s, the flames were as much about psychological domination as disposal. Fire doesn't just remove knowledge, it traumatizes those who dared to cherish it, ensuring compliance long after the embers cool. But here's the twist, fire's transformative power cuts both ways. Just as it obliterates, it also preserves. The volcanic ash that carbonized Herculaneum's scrolls didn't just entomb them, it fossilized their contents for modern technology to resurrect. The very fires meant to silence ideas sometimes immortalize them, turning martyred texts into legends that haunt the imagination. The Book of Thoth, the lost dialogues of Aristotle, the Gnostic Gospels, Their absence has become a presence, a phantom limb of history that throbs with possibility. In trying to purify the past, the arsonists of antiquity might have guaranteed their enemies the last word, not in ink, but in smoke signals across the centuries. Perhaps that's the ultimate irony of library burnings. Those who sought to control knowledge through fire underestimated its most alchemical property, the way it refuses to disappear, transmuting instead into myth, then into obsession, and finally into a reckoning. The books they burned live on as ghosts, their missing pages a louder protest than any surviving text could muster. Every fragment we recover today isn't just a relic, it's a rebuke to the arrogance of flames. The act of burning books to silence ideas isn't unique to any one culture or era. It's a thread woven through the fabric of civilizations across time and geography. Take China's Qin dynasty in the 3rd century BCE, where Emperor Qin Shi Huang ordered the infamous burning of books and burying of scholars. Confucian texts, with their emphasis on moral duty and critique of authoritarian rule, were tossed into bonfires while legalist writings justifying absolute power were preserved. This wasn't random destruction, it was a surgical strike against philosophies that threatened the emperor's grip on power. The message was chillingly clear: history would begin with him, and any competing narratives would literally go up in smoke. Half a world away, Spanish conquistadors in the 16th century carried out their own campaign of erasure against the Maya. Bishop Diego de Landa, a missionary in the Yucatan, oversaw the burning of thousands of bark paper codices, dismissing them as superstition and lies of the devil. Among the handful that survived, like the Dresden Codex, we find precise astronomical charts tracking Venus and predicting eclipses, proof that the Maya possessed scientific knowledge rivaling Europe's. But the true loss lies in the countless texts documenting their history, medicine, and theology, leaving us with fragments of a civilization filtered through the lens of its destroyers. The parallels are striking. Whether in China or Mesoamerica, the victors didn't just conquer land, they rewrote the story of the conquered. Even within the same region, the pattern repeats with eerie consistency. When the Umayyad Caliphate invaded Visigothic Spain in the 8th century, they spared the great libraries of Toledo, seeing value in the knowledge they held. Yet centuries later, during the Reconquista, Christian forces burned Arabic texts en masse, targeting works on philosophy, medicine, and mathematics ironically, many of which were translations of Greek classics Europe had long forgotten. The difference in approach reveals a shared understanding. Knowledge is power, but only if it serves the narrative of those in control. The Umayyads preserved what aligned with their vision. The Reconquistadors destroyed what challenged theirs. What makes these scattered events more than isolated tragedies is the shared logic behind them. In Rome, Emperor Diocletian ordered the destruction of Manichaean texts, fearing their egalitarian teachings would undermine social hierarchies. In 16th century Mexico, Spanish priests burned Aztec codices to sever indigenous people from their own histories. Each case reflects a recognition that ideas are more dangerous than armies because they outlast them. A sword can enforce obedience, but only fire can erase the memory of alternatives. The most unsettling revelation lies in how these tactics transcend ideology. Whether motivated by religious zeal, political consolidation, or outright conquest, the perpetrators shared one goal: to collapse the spectrum of human thought into a single, approved narrative. The Qin Emperor, Diego de Landa, and the Reconquistadors might never have met, but they'd have understood each other perfectly. Their methods weren't just about destroying knowledge, they were about monopolizing imagination itself, ensuring no one could even conceive of a world organized differently. Yet for all their efficiency, these campaigns of erasure left behind something their architects never anticipated: the ghostly imprint of what was lost. The absence of Confucian descent in China speaks volumes about its perceived threat. The gaps in Mayan astronomy hint at discoveries we'll never fully grasp. Even the charred edges of surviving manuscripts, like the Herculaneum scrolls, whisper of neighboring texts that didn't make it. In trying to control the past, these destroyers inadvertently highlighted the very ideas they sought to suppress, turning them into legends that refuse to die. The irony is thick enough to taste. Fire, meant to silence, became the loudest testament to what once was and what might have been. Imagine holding the entire Iliad in your mind, every battle, every speech, every intricate metaphor without a single written note. This wasn't just a feat of ancient poets. It was the norm for scholars, storytellers, and lawmakers long before libraries existed. The art of memory wasn't just a skill, it was a sacred tradition, honed through techniques so powerful they could etch entire libraries' worth of knowledge into the folds of the human brain. The Greeks called it the method of loci, a system where information was mentally placed in elaborate memory palaces, vivid architectural landscapes where every room, corridor, and object served as a hook for facts, stories, or laws. A politician might stroll through his imagined villa, recalling each point of a speech by the statues in the courtyard. A physician could diagnose ailments by mentally walking through a temple where each pillar represented a symptom. These weren't party tricks, they were the hard drives of antiquity, storing data with an efficiency that still baffles modern neuroscientists. Then came the written word, and with it, a slow unraveling of this mental discipline. As scrolls filled the shelves of Alexandria and tablets stacked up in Nineveh, the urgency to remember faded. Why labor for years to internalize texts when you could simply reach for a parchment? But here's the twist: when those libraries burned, the safety net vanished. Generations who'd outsourced memory to papyrus found themselves stranded, their mental muscles atrophied. The loss wasn't just physical, it was cognitive. The very act of relying on external storage had reshaped how brains processed information, trading deep retention for quick reference. The irony is almost painful. Today, we're drowning in information but starving for wisdom, scrolling through endless digital pages while retaining almost nothing. Modern studies show that students who handwrite notes recall far more than those who type, proof that the deeper cognitive grooves carved by active engagement still matter. Ancient memory techniques weren't just about storage. They forged connections, linking facts to emotions and spaces in ways that sparked creativity. When Simonides of Chios reconstructed a banquet hall's guest list by mentally walking through the rubble after an earthquake, he wasn't just remembering, he was rewiring his brain to see patterns invisible to passive readers. Rediscovering these methods could revolutionize how we learn. Imagine medical students navigating memory palaces where each organ system lives in a room, its diseases and treatments pinned to the walls like anatomical art. Or coders visualizing algorithms as sprawling cities, their logic flowing like subway lines between districts. The Benedictine monks of the Middle Ages preserved classical knowledge not just by copying texts, but by chanting them daily, embedding words in rhythm and sound. Their secret, understanding that memory isn't a warehouse, it's a theater, where information becomes unforgettable when it's staged with drama and spatial precision. The greatest tragedy of the library burnings might not be the scrolls we lost, but the mental architectures we abandoned in their shadow. In an age of cloud storage and AI assistance, we've outsourced not just knowledge, but the very act of knowing. The ancient art of memory reminds us that the human mind, when trained, is the most resilient library of all, one no flame can touch. Perhaps the final lesson from those ashes isn't about the fragility of books, but the enduring power of what happens when we truly learn to remember. Speculating about the contents of vanished libraries is like trying to reconstruct a symphony from a single surviving note. The legendary Library of Alexandria alone supposedly housed over 500,000 scrolls, enough to fill dozens of modern university libraries, yet less than 1% of its catalog survives in fragments. Among the missing could be treatises that would rewrite our understanding of antiquity. Take the rumored works of Democritus, who theorized about parallel worlds where every possible outcome unfolds simultaneously. His surviving fragments hint at multiverse concepts quantum physicists are only now confirming. What if his lost writings contained mathematical proofs or thought experiments far beyond what we've rediscovered? Then there are the whispers of forbidden sciences. The Egyptian priest Manetho wrote of vaults containing the knowledge of the gods, detailed accounts of technologies that blurred the line between magic and engineering. The so-called Book of Thoth, mentioned in temple inscriptions but never found, allegedly held spells to animate statues and commune with celestial beings. While these sound like myths, consider this. Hero of Alexandria's surviving manuscripts describe steam-powered automatons and mechanical temple miracles that would have stunned medieval Europe. If his minor works survived, what earth-shaking revelations might his lost volumes have contained? The Eastern world's losses are equally staggering. Nalanda University in India, torched by invaders in the 12th century, was said to possess medical texts detailing surgical techniques we've only recently reinvented. Travelers' accounts mention libraries where Buddhist monks studied mind sciences, enabling telepathy and precognition, disciplines modern neuroscience is just beginning to explore. One surviving Tibetan manuscript references a Nalanda text called the Mirror of Infinite Possibilities, which allegedly mapped consciousness as a quantum phenomenon. Whether literally true or metaphorically profound, such works suggest ancient scholars were grappling with concepts we consider cutting-edge. Perhaps most tantalizing are the gaps in our historical record that hint at deliberate excision. Why do multiple Roman historians casually reference Etruscan books of prophecy that no longer exist? What became of the Persian star charts Greek astronomers praised for their accuracy charts later Islamic scholars claimed showed celestial bodies invisible to the naked eye? The recurring pattern is undeniable. Civilizations with advanced knowledge that inconveniently challenged prevailing worldviews saw their records systematically purged. This isn't just about mourning lost information, it's about recognizing how intellectual suppression distorts time itself. When Caliph Omar allegedly justified burning Alexandria's library by declaring its contents either redundant with the Quran or heresy against it, he wasn't just destroying books. He was erasing entire branches of human thought, pruning the tree of knowledge until only one narrative remained. The same impulse echoes through history. Qin dynasty China burning Confucian texts, Spanish conquistadors incinerating Mayan codices, Victorian collectors discarding primitive African astronomical tablets as curios. Yet the most haunting question isn't what we know was lost, it's what we don't know existed. Like dark matter's gravitational pull, the shape of vanished libraries can only be inferred from the gaps they left behind. A passing reference in Plato mentions Egyptian maps showing Atlantis' location. A single sentence in a Byzantine chronicle alludes to mechanical wonders in Carthage archives before Rome burned them. These fragments suggest that antiquity's intellectual landscape wasn't a barren plain with a few towering monuments. It was a dense forest we've only glimpsed through the ashes. Reconstructing these lost catalogs isn't idle fantasy, It's an act of philosophical rebellion. Every time we imagine Pythagoras' rumored treatise on harmonic levitation or the Mayas' missing calculations of galactic cycles, we reject the notion that history belongs solely to its censors. The fire that melts wax tempers steel, and the ideas too dangerous to burn may be the ones most worth resurrecting. The Renaissance wasn't just a rebirth, it was a desperate scavenger hunt through the ashes of antiquity. When scholars like Petrarch and Poggio Bracciolini scoured European monasteries for forgotten Greek and Roman texts, they weren't just rediscovering classics, they were piecing together a puzzle with 90% of the pieces missing. Take Leonardo da Vinci, whose notebooks bulge with inventions eerily reminiscent of Hero of Alexandria's lost works on pneumatics and automata. His flying machines and underwater breathing devices suggest he was reinventing wheels that had already been perfected centuries earlier. If only he'd had access to the full archives of Alexandria instead of rumor and fragments. Newton's obsession with alchemy seems less eccentric when you realize he was chasing shadows of Hermetic traditions that had been systematically purged. His famous quote about standing on the shoulders of giants takes on new meaning when you discover those giants' figures like Democritus and Hypatia had their shoulders deliberately chopped from the historical record. The Principia Mathematica might have been written decades earlier if Newton had possessed Archimedes' complete works instead of relying on second-hand Arabic translations with critical sections omitted. Even Copernicus' heliocentric model, which revolutionized astronomy, was prefigured by Aristarchus of Samos in the 3rd century BCE, a theory that survived only as a passing mention in one of Archimedes' surviving letters. The gaps in Renaissance innovation reveal a haunting counterfactual. When Michelangelo studied human anatomy in secret, dissecting corpses by candlelight, he was replicating techniques described in lost Alexandrian medical scrolls, knowledge that had been common practice for Greek surgeons. Galileo's telescope breakthroughs came a full millennium after Arab astronomers like Alhazen had written detailed theories of optics, works that barely survived the Mongol sacking of Baghdad. These weren't just delays, they were intellectual detours forced upon Europe because the shortest paths had been erased. What's most revealing is the Renaissance's blind spots the areas where progress stalled because key texts vanished. Chemistry languished until Lavoisier because Zosimos of Panopolis' alchemical manuscripts were deliberately destroyed as heresy. Democracy remained theoretical until the Enlightenment because Aristotle's radical dialogues on citizen governance didn't survive the medieval filtering process. Even architecture plateaued for centuries after Vitruvius' 10 books on engineering were reduced to a single, damaged copy. The Renaissance wasn't just building on antiquity, it was tunneling through it with half a map. Yet the period's greatest legacy might be its unintended lesson, how fragile the chain of knowledge truly is. The humanists who reassembled antiquity's scraps did so knowing entire libraries had turned to smoke. Their frantic efforts to preserve and duplicate texts, creating the first great libraries of the modern age, stemmed from visceral understanding that every manuscript was a flickering candle in a windstorm. When we look at Leonardo's half-finished inventions or Newton's encrypted alchemical notes, we're not just seeing genius at work, we're witnessing the ghostly imprint of what might have been had the flames never fallen. Digital archives may seem indestructible compared to fragile papyrus and parchment, but our modern libraries face threats the ancients never imagined. A single solar flare could fry global server farms. A well-placed cyberattack might rewrite history without leaving burn marks. Even accidental data decay silently erodes files over time. Experts estimate we lose 3.6 million web links each year through digital rot, vanishing as quickly as Alexandrian scrolls turn to ash. The irony is profound. We've built the greatest repository of human knowledge in history, yet it's more vulnerable than stone tablets in some ways. Decentralized technologies offer a radical solution inspired by ancient failures. Blockchain-based archives like the Arweave network store data across thousands of independent nodes, making censorship nearly impossible, just as medieval monks duplicated manuscripts across distant monasteries to ensure survival. The Internet Archive's Wayback Machine preserves billions of web pages, but newer projects like the Decentralized Library of Alexandria 2.0 aim to go further, embedding texts in immutable ledgers and even encoding them into synthetic DNA for biological storage. These aren't just backup plans, they're philosophical statements about who controls collective memory, yet technology alone won't solve the deeper dilemma. The burning of antiquities libraries wasn't really about storage mediums, it was about power dynamics. When China's Great Firewall blocks foreign news sites or governments pressure platforms to memory hole inconvenient facts, they're playing the same game as Emperor Qin's book burners, just with algorithms instead of torches. The real lesson from Alexandria isn't about fireproof vaults. It's about ensuring no single authority monopolizes truth. Grassroots efforts are reclaiming this spirit. WikiLeaks' cryptographic insurance files distribute sensitive documents via peer-to-peer networks. Sci-Hub's Shadow Library makes paywalled academic research freely accessible worldwide. Even hobbyists contribute, like the volunteers digitizing censored Tibetan texts or preserving Ukrainian cultural databases during Russian bombings. These modern-day monks understand that safeguarding knowledge requires both technological innovation and ideological courage, protecting bytes while defending the right to share them. The stakes couldn't be higher. Ancient library burnings cost us centuries of progress, but a digital dark age could be permanent. When Facebook's algorithms accidentally deleted the sole digital copies of indigenous languages, or when Twitter's privatization threatened to erase dissident voices, we glimpsed how fragile our memory infrastructure truly is. Yet there's hope in the echoes. Just as Arabic translators preserved Greek thought during Europe's Middle Ages, today's decentralized networks are building a firewall against oblivion, one that no single flame can breach. The choice remains ours whether to repeat history's mistakes or finally learn from them. Conspiracy or coincidence, that's the razor's edge we walk when examining history's greatest intellectual catastrophes. On one side, skeptics dismiss the burning of libraries as tragic but random events, collateral damage in the chaos of conquest or religious upheaval. Yet when the same pattern repeats across continents and centuries, randomness starts to feel like a flimsy excuse. The Library of Alexandria didn't just burn once, it suffered multiple destructive blows over 600 years, each under suspiciously convenient circumstances. Baghdad's House of Wisdom fell precisely when the Mongol Empire sought to break the Islamic world's intellectual backbone. Even the Qin dynasty's infamous book burnings coincided perfectly with their campaign to standardize thought under authoritarian rule. The timing is too consistent to ignore. Look deeper, and a chilling formula emerges. Libraries didn't burn during periods of stability. They ignited at moments when the ideas they housed threatened to upend power structures. The Christian suppression of Gnostic texts in the 4th century didn't happen in a vacuum. It followed decades of debate over whether divinity belonged to priests or could be accessed by all. When Spanish missionaries burned Maya codices, they weren't just destroying pagan nonsense. They were erasing astronomical knowledge that challenged European cosmological supremacy. Even the accidental fires take on a sinister tint when you consider who stood to gain. After Julius Caesar's troops allegedly set Alexandria's docks ablaze, Rome conveniently became the Mediterranean's new center of learning, its rivals' prestige reduced to smoke. The beneficiaries of these intellectual blackouts form a rogues gallery of history's most calculating powers. Religious institutions consolidated dogma by eliminating competing scriptures. Empires rewrote origin stories to justify conquests. Even scholars weren't immune. Medieval universities sometimes purged works that threatened their academic monopolies. The common thread, control. A populace that can't reference alternative histories or scientific precedents is easier to manipulate. Without access to Confucian texts, kin subjects had no philosophical basis to question authoritarian rule. With Maya astronomy reduced to ashes, Spanish colonizers could paint indigenous people as primitive souls needing salvation. Yet the most compelling evidence for deliberate suppression lies in what survived. Roman engineering manuals were preserved because they served practical purposes, building roads and aqueducts to maintain empire. Greek poetry endured when it glorified heroic ideals useful to ruling classes. The filtering wasn't random, it was surgical. Texts that reinforced power structures were copied and recopied, while those challenging them mysteriously disappeared. This selectivity reveals the true agenda. It wasn't knowledge itself they feared, but knowledge in the wrong hands. Modern parallels abound. When corporate archives lose documents about harmful products, or governments classify inconvenient research, they're playing from the same ancient playbook. The methods have evolved from torches to firewalls, but the goal remains unchanged: to curate reality by controlling its source code. The great irony. Every act of suppression leaves its own trail. Just as we can reconstruct forbidden ideas from the vehemence of their critics' attacks, today's censorship campaigns often draw more attention to the truths they try to bury. The smoke from Alexandria's ruins still signals across millennia, reminding us that some lights refuse to be extinguished. The burning of ancient libraries wasn't just the destruction of books, it was the erasure of entire worlds. Each time flames consumed a repository of knowledge, they didn't merely reduce parchment to ash. They severed humanity's connection to alternate paths, to ideas that could have reshaped civilizations. Imagine a timeline where the library of Alexandria's medical scrolls survived, sparing millions from the Black Death. Picture a world where the Maya's astronomical codices weren't burned, accelerating our understanding of the cosmos by centuries. These weren't just buildings lost to fire, they were forks in the road of human progress, deliberately closed off by those who feared where those roads might lead. Yet for all the calculated destruction, something remarkable persists. The human drive to uncover truth is as relentless as the tides. Modern archaeologists painstakingly reassemble charred scrolls from Herculaneum using advanced imaging. Linguists decode forgotten scripts etched into clay tablets buried for millennia. Even the gaps in our history speak volumes: the absence of Carthage's own accounts, the silence where Hypatia's voice should be. These voids themselves become evidence of what was taken. The very act of searching for lost knowledge is a rebellion against those who tried to silence it. This isn't just about the past. Every time a government censors the internet, when corporations lock research behind paywalls, or when schools ban books, we're witnessing the same age-old struggle, the fight over who controls narrative. The difference today is that we've seen how the story ends when knowledge burns. We know the cost of letting one version of truth dominate. The lesson of Alexandria and Baghdad isn't just sorrow, it's a warning etched in smoke. So what do we do with this legacy? We become the librarians the ancients never had. Support digitization projects that preserve fragile manuscripts. Share obscure historical findings that challenge mainstream narratives. Question why certain ideas are still marginalized today. Knowledge survives not in vaults but in circulation, passed hand to hand, screen to screen, generation to generation. The irony is delicious. Those who burned libraries to control the future only made their obsession with secrecy the clearest evidence of what they feared. Every fragment we recover, every lost text we reconstruct, is a message in a bottle from the past, washing ashore centuries later with the same urgent plea: remember us. Now it's your turn. If you could resurrect one lost text from history's flames, what would it be? A suppressed scientific treatise, a forgotten philosophy, or maybe an entire library's worth of stories we'll never know? Drop your thoughts below. And if you've enjoyed this deep dive into history's shadows, hit subscribe. The past isn't done speaking.